I apologize. Um, um, okay. Um, my name is ETL Foreman, and I am a co-founder of Communities Confronting Substance Abuse. A couple of preliminaries. First of all, happy Mother's Day to all of those out there celebrating Mother's Day. Thank you for taking a short part of your day out to join us for this very important program. I'd also like to thank my employer, Duff and Phelps, who provided this fantastically efficient technical platform for us to use today. Any failures on the part of the technology platform are human error, not the platform, but thank you, Duff and Phelps, for that. We're going to go about an hour today. We have two speakers, each roughly 30 minutes. We are going to allow hopefully some time for Q&A in there as well for each of our speakers. You should be able to figure out, there should be a button there around our panel on the side of your screen for Q&A. If you send the Q&A, the questions to the host, I will be happy to work through the questions and make sure that our panelists are given the questions. And if anyone has any issues throughout, please feel free to chat me separately, and we're happy to try and resolve them. So I'd like to just take 2 minutes before going into our speakers to thank the sponsors of our second annual Mental Health and Addiction Symposium that is being co-sponsored by Communities Confronting Substance Abuse and Refa'enu. The event was supposed to take place today. It's been postponed until October 18th, but again, we want to thank our sponsors who would have been prominently advertised at our symposium had it taken place today. Center for Anxiety, one of our first platinum sponsor. Strive, a platinum sponsor. Yosef and Yitzi Solomon, thank you again for all your continuing support. Transformations, also one of our platinum sponsors. Cross River Bank, again, a great partner to us through our venture. Meister Seelig and Fine. And then our gold sponsors, Huntington Creek, Pocono Mountain Recovery Center, Recovery at the Crossroads. And finally, our silver and bronze sponsors, offices of Jan Meyer, Valley Health System, and Moskowitz and Book. Thank you again to all of those sponsors. We appreciate your sponsorship and look forward to, again, thanking you at our symposium when we have it in person. Just a couple of words about your two hosts today. Communities Confronting Substance Abuse is a nonprofit organization founded with the goal of creating stigma-free communities through awareness, education, and programming regarding substance misuse and addiction. We founded and manage a free support group for family members of loved ones suffering from addiction, work with local yeshiva day and high schools on several initiatives, which include student, faculty, and parent programming, and we organize community educational events like this one today and our upcoming symposium on October 18, 2020. We are currently conducting our support group online, which is an opportunity for people who live outside the Bergen County area to connect with other people who are coping with the same issues, create dialogue, and hopefully find support. We encourage anyone who's dealing with a loved one who suffers from substance misuse or addiction to join us. Please do not hesitate to contact us for any reason. We are proud to partner with Refa'enu in bringing you this online presentation. Refa'enu is a nonprofit organization founded as a means to provide the Jewish community with education about and support for those affected by depression and bipolar disorder and other behavioral health issues. Through educational outreach and continued management of peer-led support groups for people with mood disorders and for their loved ones, Refa'enu aims to assist individuals on an ongoing basis toward better mental health management, as well as educate the general Jewish population and decrease disorder-related stigma that may impede proper care. Due to the current climate, Refa'enu's Paramus, New Jersey-based peer-led support group for people with mood disorders has been expanded to Zoom meetings and a Facebook support group. Please feel free to contact the organization with any questions or comments. Website and contact information for both organizations are on your screen now. We are pleased and honored that we have two very special speakers this morning. Our first speaker, Dr. David Rosmarin, is the founder director of the Center for Anxiety and an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. His clinical work and research have received media attention from Scientific American, the Boston Globe, and the New York Times. I'm now going to shut off my video with the hope of getting Dr. Rosmarin's slides up. In the interim, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Rosmarin. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Edward. Really appreciate that introduction. And also thanks for just getting this happening under such unusual circumstances. And I think we're all looking forward to being together in person in October. But for now, what better way to spend Mother's Day in quarantine than talking about mental health issues at 9:30 in the morning. The slides are going, not going? How are we doing over there?
Not going yet, but did you not going yet? For some reason I didn't get the email. But
really, I sent it by Google Drive.
So Leanne's going to chat you the right address to send to. Hopefully she can forward it to me, and because I can't access Google Drive from this PC, but hopefully, yeah, we'll be able to get it up because okay.
Well, if it weren't a curveball, then it wouldn't be the current era. In fact, that's kind of part of what I'm going to speak about. If you look at, I'm just going to jump right in and just go with it. If you look
get it going, keep going.
If you look at before COVID, before all this craziness that we're dealing with, American society has struggled very significantly with mental health conditions in general, but anxiety in particular. According to the NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, a fifth of adults countrywide before COVID were having an anxiety disorder. Now, who knows? And 2/5 of adults over the lifespan would have an anxiety disorder. Again, this is all before March 18th. And in addition to prevalence, though, we also saw very high levels of severity. In one recent study, just off the top of my head, in 2018, 1/5 of college students were engaging in self-injury, intentional destruction of bodily tissue in order to cope with negative emotions at least once in the past year. 1/5 of college students, and I'm not talking about counseling center students, I'm talking about any college student. So those are high levels. And that was all prior to COVID. Now, God only knows. I mean, it's in a span of only a couple of weeks, we've gone from high levels of anxiety to basically almost everyone being completely unmoored, panic-stricken, obsessed with fear. The ways that people are being impacted by this, and my office in New York has definitely been inundated. I mean, it's been a really interesting ride. People are under genuinely a lot of stress. There's significant economic concerns. Families are sequestered in homes. Graduations, weddings, vacations are all on hold. Concerts and sporting events, right? Those tickets for whatever concert in the summer, all those open air, events are not happening. And the issue of coping is extremely important. So it's not entirely surprising that we're struggling. But if you look at it from a historical perspective, it's important to recognize that we are having an extreme emotional response to this, to what's happening right now, and that's not the way it used to be. Full disclosure, I was not alive during the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, October. And it was a showdown between the United Soviet Union and the United States that literally brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. And historians, I believe, pretty much agree that the world almost blew up in 1962 because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, I wasn't around, but my understanding of it is that the Soviets basically built and occupied these tens of sites in Cuba, a couple miles off the coast of Florida, with nuclear devices, with nuclear launch capabilities. And American life barely changed. Parents continued to go to work. Kids went to school, albeit, they had gas masks and they were told to duck and cover under their desks. But basically, there wasn't a discernible impact on the financial markets, aside from, the biggest damage was U.S.-Cuban relations. And to be clear, I don't think we should be taking this current crisis any less seriously than we are from a behavioral perspective. I've been inside for 5-6 weeks, however long it's been, just like all of you, hopefully. My family, we're very carefully self-isolating. The stressors are real. I'm not saying that there isn't anything to be concerned about, But at the same time, we have to stop and focus and for a minute and wonder, why are we so incredibly anxious? And why has our response been so extreme? So there are a lot of different coping skills that people can use in order to deal with all sorts of negative situations, and COVID's no different. Some of them we are doing, others we are not as a society. And I think it's unfortunate that the ones that we are using are mildly to maybe moderately effective, and the ones we aren't using tend to be the most powerful. But because of a bunch of societal reasons and factors, we tend to shy away from those more powerful, those more helpful coping strategies. I'll try to explain what I mean. In terms of coping strategies, there are a number of ones. The first that comes to mind as a clinical psychologist, which I am, is cognitive strategies. And those are ways of just keeping your thinking in check. Cognitive strategies involve helping us to recognize when we're catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is when our negative thoughts are just getting out of hand and they're going down a roller coaster. So for example, when we're thinking the worst, it's important to check the facts and to recognize that the majority of people today will not get COVID. Among those who do get infected, most will not require hospital level care. If people do require hospital level care, there are options in many cases. And in fact, a recent CDC report found that 78% of COVID-19 patients had at least one underlying health condition, which most of us know at this point. And yes, there are scary facts and figures and news flashes on the New York Times about children now being affected. But we have to be very careful from a cognitive perspective. We're talking about 10, 15, 20. We're talking about very small numbers here in a large population, and we don't really know what's going on. So we do have to keep our thinking in check. And this is the kind of message which can help. And it's the kind of thing that's being emphasized a lot by the CDC, by other national bodies. Another one is behaviors. Now, behaviors are even more powerful. The three top ones are going to be sleep, diet, and exercise. Of those three, sleep is definitely king. This is one that we're not doing so well because with all of these amazing devices that we have, people are up till the wee hours doing work, catching up with social media and whatnot. I'm doing a study with some folks at Columbia, and we sampled about 300 adults in the first 2 or 3 days of the quarantine in the New York area, just north of New York City, where the whole thing kind of started. And what we found was the biggest factor, even more than having a pre-existing medical condition, in terms of predicting a person's stress in dealing with COVID, was actually the quality of their sleep, their ability to get to sleep on time, waking up in the morning, having regular sleep patterns. There's a number of reasons for this: circadian rhythm disturbances, and whatnot. Also, there's maladaptive changes in the HPA axis, which can have cascading effects on the entire central nervous system if people aren't getting enough sleep. If I were to have one piece of behavioral advice for people, it's have a bedtime, shut off your device at least 30 to 45 minutes before your bedtime, and have a regular wake-up time. And even if the rest of the day is a little bit jumbled because of the insanity of what everybody is facing today, at least for 8 hours of the day, at least for a third of the day, we have some sort of regularity, and that will have a shift on the circadian rhythms. With regards to diet and exercise, these are things, again, these are being promoted really by the CDC to its credit, although I don't think the focus on sleep has been enough, and I think that the data really points us in that direction. When it comes to diet, having regular diet, everybody's gained 5 to 10 pounds, and that's to be expected. We have to give ourselves that latitude. But more than that, to try to have somewhat of a balanced diet. And exercise is hugely helpful. The Heart Association of America, having nothing to do with COVID, recommends 150 minutes or 2.5 hours a week of moderate intensity exercise, not just walking. So people are, that's 30 minutes, 5 days a week. So that's something to aim for as a minimum. Another piece, though, is our devices. And this is getting some coverage in the news and by the national health bodies, but I don't think nearly enough. The second most important factor in my study with the Columbia folks, which predicted people's levels of anxiety, was electronic media use. How much are they checking WhatsApp? How much are they checking Facebook? How much are they engaged in these kinds of things? And to be clear, it's such a double-edged sword, because today, if you don't have Wi-Fi and connectivity, you might not have a social life. So obviously, we have to use these devices to facilitate meaningful one-on-one communication. That's very different than a WhatsApp group or than checking the news. And if people are checking 8 to 16 times a day, or even 4 to 8 times a day, once or twice, once every 1 to 2 waking hours, those people are in much worse shape in terms of anxiety and otherwise than people who are checking once a day versus twice to 4 times a day. And that's not an unreasonable amount to be checking social media and the news 1 to 4 times a day. You're not going to miss any key information if you check the news 1 to 4 times a day, and same with a WhatsApp group. We're not going to fall out of sync with your friends. That's just not going to happen. What will happen is probably a decrease in anxiety and tension if we aim for lower. I'm not saying to eliminate it completely. Again, that's definitely not what I'm doing, and I wouldn't recommend it. But I do think that we need to tone it down. How are we doing on the slides, by the way?
So you should be able to share yourself now. If you try, you should not be grayed out anymore. Let's see if that works.
Yeah, I can. You can do a whiteboard or a file.
I have a future in IT, apparently.
Apparently. A whiteboard? Do I want to share a whiteboard? No, I don't want to share a whiteboard.
No, you want to share your file and get those slides up as a file.
No, I'm sharing my whiteboard. Well, I do not have enough future in IT. That much is clear. Let's try this again. Share a file. Presentations. Refa'enu. Bam. Oh, it's messing it up. Well, we tried. Can you still see me and hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we'll just stick with what we got. One of the things that's not being focused on enough is interpersonal aspects of it and how to manage it. And I want to give everybody here a very clear tool in order to handle things. Interpersonal coping strategies are really underrated. Some of the data suggests that female participants in particular in long-term relationships, if they're undergoing an fMRI, basically a video of blood flow in the brain, while they're receiving painful shocks, okay? This has been done experimentally. And they're looking at images of their partner versus control people, they will, if they're securely attached to their partners, they're going to have significantly less pain-related neural activity and better brain functioning, in addition to less actually reported pain. Human relationships are extremely powerful in terms of mediating our stress responses, our emotional responses in general, and even immunofunctioning. So I do wonder even about the potential health implications of having close relationships. If I have one piece of advice in the interpersonal realm, it's beyond just romance and close relationships, it's to allow people in our circles, people who are in our close circles, people in our families, to see if we are struggling and to communicate to them that we need them. Often people take sort of like a stiff upper lip approach, or like, I don't need you, or I'm just going to do this on my own. And that doesn't create closeness. The reality is if we are in close relationships with people, we are vulnerable. We need them. That's the nature of a relationship, is that you give up part of who you are in the relationship. It's an interdependence, not an independence, and not a dependence either, but an interdependence where part of what I'm experiencing is dependent on you. I'm in a relationship with my kids, with my family, with my wife. And here I am, giving a talk from my office. I'm dependent on them right now, not to, come in and barge in and make a noise. And I can tell them that, like, hey, I'm stressed out, I'm giving a talk, I'm struggling with my PowerPoint, and I really need this to be the case. Can you please help me? As opposed to coming at it with either anger or with pulling away. Those are usually the way that people handle things under stress. So the words "I need you" are the most important in any close relationship. I need you. I need this from you. Can you please help me? And showing that vulnerability and being brave enough to recognize it is a key strategy. And this is something we're not fully doing, and certainly not doing enough. I think the best strategies, even more than the intrapersonal strategies, and even more than key intrapersonal strategies, such as sleep and media use, I think that they come from the world of spirituality. And this is one of the reasons why I think our society is struggling more than we did in previous years in other national crises, is because our sense of spirituality in our society has definitely decreased. And I'm not speaking about this as a rabbi, because that's Rabbi Horowitz's job. Let him, that's what he's here to say. I think, I don't even know, maybe not. But I'm speaking as a clinical scientist. Looking at spirituality and religion as tremendous resources for people to cope under stress. Spirituality can engender very adaptive coping strategies in many novel ways. And just to give you some data, today, in 2007, not too long ago, 78% of the population was Christian. That fell to 70% by 2014. By contrast, in the early 1960s, it was 95%. So this is the first international crisis that we're facing anyway in the United States, where less than 2/3 of the population has a religious affiliation. It's the first time in history. And I do wonder whether that is having some sort of effect on the maladaptive coping that we're experiencing. Today, 26% of US adults are atheists or agnostics or nothing. In 1963, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was 2%, 13 times as much today. And again, the American Psychiatric Association, the CDC have done a great job promoting certain forms of coping. Spirituality has been almost missed. There is a group within the SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, which is promoting, and I think they're doing really wonderful work, but it's really few and far between. In terms of spirituality, there's so many things. There's gratitude, which is a spiritual emotion, being thankful, being appreciative, being readiness to return the kindness of others. It's considered a spiritual emotion because it's valued by religious systems. Also, if we're grateful for things like breathing, it's not an interpersonal thing. It's who are you grateful to? It begs that question. There are very salutary effects of gratitude on human emotion, and there's a lot to be grateful for today, like running water, or access to communication, or more time for sleep, even if we're not taking it, much more time with loved ones, heroic hospital workers, grocery stores, which are delivering to our door in many cases. And I think that we need to be, to practice this. One practical strategy is once per day, counting our blessings. It can be a 1-minute strategy, literally 60 seconds per day of counting our blessings. And it can be done if people are praying anyway in religious communities. It can be done in the context of that. It can be done at a table when people are eating. It can be done before bedtime. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that we take a couple minutes, even 1 minute every day, just to practice gratitude. Another one, maybe even more, is what we call meaning making in psychology, which is to start asking the question of why. What's interesting about meaning making is that Viktor Frankl spoke about this. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian Jewish neurologist, psychiatrist, and a Holocaust survivor. He founded something called logotherapy. And he observed that individuals survived or perished in the Holocaust to some degree, dependent on whether they found meaning and purpose in their suffering. He observed that empirically in the camps. He spoke specifically about the ability to exercise control and to have free will, that people can choose to exercise free will. In other words, we are not at the mercy of circumstances when it comes to our emotions, when it comes to how we feel. Conversely, when we don't have a sense of choice, when we feel that we're really stuck, we often tend to decline. So one key thing here is to think about higher order questions like, why are we here on planet Earth? And what are we intending to do? And what is our core meaning? And what is our core purpose? We can contemplate that even though it's a really stressful time. And we might be limited in accomplishing as much of that as we would have before the crisis because, well, we can't leave our homes as much as we used to. But it's a rare opportunity to sit and to think and to contemplate, what do we love to do? What are we here to do? I do encourage people to only ask these questions if they potentially have an answer. What we don't want is people asking these kinds of questions and getting really stuck and nihilistic and like there is no purpose and like I have no purpose and so if people have a propensity towards depression, I would want them discussing this with somebody else who's going to help them get unstuck, because this is a powerful process. So it's either used for good or for negative. But nevertheless, this is the kind of, I believe, spiritual strategy that could have an enormous effect, Another one is acceptance, which we're speaking about a little bit more these days, but I don't think enough. Radical acceptance. The concept is fairly simple. Basically, it's about accepting life on life's terms, not on our own, and not our own terms, not resisting what we cannot change. We can't change this circumstance. So the question is, do we fight against that reality? Or do we accept that reality and then do we move on from there? Radical acceptance, it tends to be a challenge for us steeped in the Western society, because our culture is so obsessed with control. We have predictions for things, like everything, like AccuWeather, which will tell you the minute that it's going to start raining, or these days snowing. Craziness. We also have tremendous need for trying to avoid pain, and we're very allergic to intense emotions these days. So we tend not to do well when it comes to acceptance. Maybe that's one of the messages of COVID, that we're not in control, and it's time to recognize that. I think acceptance of the fact that we're not in control can be contemplated and built every day. Just taking a moment and letting it reverberate that we are not in control of the situation, and learning to come to that not from a place of reluctance, but from a place of acceptance. Facing and not avoiding the realities of COVID, not trying to fight it. Another one, and a related one, is embracing uncertainty as opposed to being intolerant of it. Psychological science has taught us that embracing uncertainty is enormous for protecting against anxiety. The reality is that we don't know what's going to happen next. We can't control what's going to happen next. And can we lean into that, or are we going to fight against it? When we lean into it and embrace it, there are new opportunities that appear, such as in medical research. Here in Boston, where I'm living, Harvard Medical School and MIT are collaborating on over $115 million in collaborative research. That kind of thing that's a rarity around here. People don't usually collaborate; they just do their own research. Here in medical innovations and across the world, we have telehealth. One of my kids, hurt her finger the other day, and the next thing you know, we're having a telehealth meeting with their doctor. That never happened before. That's amazing innovation. There's been, notwithstanding some of the issues with China and Iran over the last week, international diplomacy, I think, has been a high. I saw the United States offering aid to North Korea in the first weeks. North Korea, like, who would have guessed? And when people embrace uncertainty, you have these amazing opportunities. In education, okay, it's struggling, people are struggling, but like there could be, I think everybody would agree that the education system is in need of reform. In the Jewish world, our education system has its pluses, but like I think everybody would agree that there are some major areas for further development, and maybe we'll see some e-learning platforms that are actually going to work, at least for secular studies. In terms of finances, I think we're going to be a lot more robust and successful after coming out from this. Not all businesses are going to make it, but we are at some point going to have a stronger economy. The bottom line is, when we try to shy away from uncertainty, we miss out on all these opportunities. But when we embrace it and we say, I'm not here to know the next step. I'm here to make my best guess and put my efforts down. I think that's really a spiritual concept, because the idea is we're not here to know. We can't know. That's not for us. That's for something higher. And the minute that we accept that and decide to move on, that's a tremendous resource. To draw this to a close, even through the use of all these strategies, whether it's cognitive or behavioral or interpersonal or spiritual or otherwise, many people still need additional help. And I think one of the things that is happening today, and hopefully will happen even more, is that people who are struggling are reaching out. My office at the Center for Anxiety, we're offering free 30-minute phone calls, free 30-minute consultations with anybody who calls the office. And the number is 646-837-5557. And we've been helping, we are getting a steady stream of calls, which I think is great, because it means that people are reaching out for help and saying, hey, I'm really feeling stuck around this. What can we do? So, to those ends, I think that programs like this are just really helpful and impactful. And if only that they help us to accept that there is only so much that we can do. There is so much that we have to, deal with and tolerate going forward. But the more important thing is when we do it together and we recognize that, people are struggling and that's okay. We're so much better poised to be able to do so. Thank you.
Dr. Rosmarin, so I will take your words to heart and try to practice radical acceptance around the fact that we cannot control technology the way that we'd like to. And apologize when we're able to get the slides working. We have one question that's come in that I'm hoping you can address. The question is, I noticed that those who tend to become angry easily or who are mistrustful about the government, the world, etc., are experiencing an escalation of these feelings. It seems difficult for them to redirect these worrisome thoughts. Do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah. So this is exactly an example that fits into what I was saying before. You can take all the cognitive approaches in the world and even a couple of the behavioral ones, and something like anger, you're not going to really have a lot of success with. The interpersonal one of, hey, I'm having a really hard time, I need your help to calm down, that will take some of the air out of the balloon in the house. Like if there's somebody who has a propensity to anger, and let's say their loved ones say to them, hey, I noticed that you're struggling recently. When you're struggling, please come to me for help, as opposed to, just showing anger. I think that sets up a dynamic a lot better within the home. When people are showing their vulnerability to other people's anger, and also encouraging somebody with anger to open up and express their vulnerability and their need to other people around them. So yeah, I agree that, folks who are, struggling with those kinds of things they need more help than we're providing.
Thank you so much for that. And again, people who have questions going forward for either Dr. Rosmarin or Rabbi Horowitz when he starts to speak, please feel free to send them through the Q&A panel, and we'll try and get as many addressed as we have time for. Dr. Rosmarin, thank you so much for your words. Incredibly inspirational and practical. So we appreciate that. Our next speaker, and Rabbi Horowitz, I'm going to unmute you now so that we're ready to go. Rabbi Yakov Horowitz is the founder and dean of Yeshiva Darchei Noam in Monsey, New York, and the founder director of Project Y.E.S, Youth Enrichment Services. He's recognized throughout the Jewish community as an authority on raising children in these troubled times. His bold and insightful presentations, workshops, CDs, and articles have helped to mold a generation of parents and educators. Rabbi Horowitz, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and the floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leanne, for inviting me to participate and for your amazing work. Dr. Rosmarin, thank you very much for your presentation. I really did learn a lot from listening to you. And full disclosure, I was alive during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The talk is really it's listed as addiction, mental health, and I think that what I'd like to offer as a takeaway is in the area of of people who are vulnerable and what our takeaway message should be for ourselves, for our families, and for our community. You know, COVID has leveled the playing field very, very much because we're all vulnerable right now. And ironically, I really found it fascinating that some of the people that I've been working with, that I've been encouraging and asking to go for help, thankfully most of them do, but among those who have not been yet comfortable going forward and reaching out for help, some of them actually are more comfortable now because they sort of feel there's no embarrassment. I've been saying this, I've been pitching this to them and say, look, everybody's reaching out for help. The only difference is that the people who were vulnerable before are much more vulnerable now. And I think that's a really important takeaway. You know, I got a phone call from one of my students, one of my old Talmidim. I started teaching almost 40 years ago. My first group, I taught 8th grade. I was in my low 20s. The kids were 13 years old. My first group of students are turning 50 now. And one of my 40-something students called me last week out of the cold. Ari Brand, I hope you don't mind if I said it. He called me up and he said, you know, Rebbe, I just called to see how you're doing. And I like, you know, did I miss a memo? He said, no, Rebbe, I was thinking about you and I know you're listening. You know, you must be helping so many people now and you must be under great stress. I just wanted to call to see how you're doing. And I don't get those calls often. I got to tell you, it felt wonderful. I'm not embarrassed to say that it felt good. And I think our takeaway of this entire experience, there are takeaways in terms of our family. You know, all of us, especially my wife and I, Baruch Hashem, we have this chus to be empty nesting. Our children are all married, so we've been alone. And you know, you have the feeling of the children coming over and doing the social distancing hello with the grandkids and not being able to hold them or kiss them. Especially, you know, the older kids get it. The babies don't know what's going on really, but you know, that 2-3-year-old, when you can't communicate, it's a killer. You know, you see them wanting to come to you. You know, our takeaway is to treasure that more, to treasure life, to treasure family. I think even in the area of spiritual pursuits, I think, you know, part of the losing our minyan and our communal service of God, our communal prayers, our davening, the tzibur, I think part of it is really an opportunity to drill down to the core and develop a more meaningful relationship with God. You know, one of the things I've been working very hard to try to get every single person in the community to follow the social distancing and you know, not attend shul when the boards of health suggest that we shouldn't be going. And one of the things that I've been telling people is I said, work on your relationship with God. It's okay. Pray at home. Daven at home. You might wind up growing in a way that you didn't otherwise. But I really want to talk about the empathy and compassion for those that you don't see and those that you don't come into contact with. The average person out there doesn't come into contact with all the time. And I want you to try to realize what it's like to walk in their shoes. You know, I made a decision right before Pesach. A few of my colleagues in the field, we were talking a few weeks before Pesach and before Passover, and we were concerned that God forbid people who were alone for 3 days because of this, you know, people who had normally family to go to and friends to go to, at least for meals, that were literally alone the entire Passover, the entire Pesach, we were really concerned. And we set up a few things. Some organizations set up, you know, support. A lot of rabbinic organizations left guidance for the rabbis, which was really wonderful. I decided to leave my phone on, and I publicized it, that my phone is on and my email is on if anybody wants to talk. And, you know, the number one takeaway for me was how grateful the people were. I don't have the words to express to you what it meant to people who got in touch with me just to thank me for caring about them. The vast, overwhelming majority of people that I communicated with did not call and did not reach out on Shabbat and Yom Tov and Chag. But they were so grateful that someone reached out and expressed the desire to communicate with them. We're all good people, and I want to make it perfectly clear. I am not, God forbid, I am not suggesting going to that whole area of why things happen. I don't know why things happen. I'm not embarrassed to say that I don't know. I'm deeply suspicious of people who say they do know what happened. But nevertheless, when something comes our way, you know, in the business world, they say, don't waste the crisis. So I don't think we should walk away from this moment without really trying to find a takeaway. And, you know, I do a lot of work with abuse survivors. I do a lot of work with folks who are in recovery. Many times the people who are abuse survivors wind up turning to drugs or anything to dull the pain of their abuse. And they're struggling. Many of them are really, really struggling. I said everybody's vulnerable, but the vulnerable are more vulnerable. And one of the things that I thought of, again, please, I am not suggesting, God forbid, in the area of punishment, but it is a takeaway. And a few friends of mine, unfortunately, had to have funerals for their parents and have them go to the die of COVID without being able to see them in the hospital, and without, you know, basically the dread of having all of us who have parents, you know, the dread of being alone, of having a parent be alone, and a funeral with nobody there. This is what our children who are chas v'shalom hurting themselves or killing themselves or overdosing, that's really what it looks like. So many of them are dying alone. So many of them are being buried alone with barely a minion there. We have to do more to reach out to our children. We're losing too many of our kids. I imagine that the suicide rate is lower than the general population, but it's way too high. And I really feel that if we did what this amazing, I'm sorry, I'm losing it, please forgive me. If we did what the amazing healthcare providers are doing and picked up a phone so that they could communicate with their loved ones, if you know, what are they doing there? They're in the hospital. I cannot imagine what it's like to be a healthcare worker. God bless all of you, you know, that run and run in when everybody's running out. I try to do as much shopping online as possible. When I do go in, I plan it like a military maneuver. I mask up and cover every part of my body that's, you know, I have a little slit for the eyes, whatever you could imagine. And I can't imagine what it's like for those healthcare providers. And somehow they're taking out their phones when people are near the end of their life and they are allowing communication to the others, to the family who loves them. And I think that I just encourage people to try to run in when people are running away. When you see someone struggling with addiction, when you see someone struggling with a mental illness, and thank God it's much better now. You know, 20 years ago, I've been working with teens at risk formally for 25 years and informally for almost 40. And when one of the kids, God forbid, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, if they took their own lives, it was just sold off as an aneurysm and people didn't talk about it. And thankfully, people are talking about it. And when you talk about things, things get better. But it's so lonely for them. It's so lonely. So think about it. Think about what it's like to have a child that's struggling with an addiction. It's not only a tragedy with an individual affects the entire family, and it winds up affecting the parents of someone who's struggling with addiction. The siblings feel embarrassed. They feel out of touch. They feel like they're alone in plain view. Another area, and I'm not comparing it to an illness or addiction, but over the past 2 years, 2 years ago, I was at a panel discussion. It was at New Year's Eve. A wonderful organization in Queens did a charity of a fundraiser, and 3 of us were on a panel, and we were asked a number of questions. And one of the people, I'm a straight shooter. I answer people in a public setting like this, like I would say in private. And somebody asked the panel what the, without compromising on Jewish law and halacha, what should we do with the growing group of LGBTQ children and adults and their families? Like, what should be done? So I said, but I feel that I have not, I haven't figured out the theological components of it. I don't profess to understand it. I do believe in God and I do keep halacha, but I don't understand this. But I said there are children that are struggling, and I'm terrified that the suicide rate among these kids are so high. That's all I said. I didn't say, I didn't go to the entire halacha piece. That night, my social media and my communications were exploding. And I got at least between 50 and 100 LGBTQ, either young men and women or their parents, got in touch with me asking for help. And I honestly had not done that work in that much in that space. My amazing wife and I, we invited 10 LGBTQ young men and women to our home for lunch, just to listen to them, to try to find out a little bit more about their lives so we could help them and help their families. And the sense of alienation that they feel, and again, I'm not going to the whole halacha piece. Halacha is halacha, the Torah is the Torah. I'm not even going there. I'm just talking about reaching out and communicating. One of the saddest things that when we went around the table, my wife and I, we introduced ourselves. We told the kids, share your name, don't share your name, whatever you like. And one of the young men that was there, when we were talking, just tell me a little bit about yourself. He said, Rabbi, when I sat down here, I made a shechianu. Shechianu was a blessing reserved for, life cycle events that are very meaningful. We say it on the Chagim, on the holidays, and Yom Tovim, and he said, I never thought that in my lifetime, somebody like you would invite me to your home knowing who I am. And it was so heartbreaking that this is what he thought, that he wouldn't be welcome in my home, in our home. We have to do more. We have to reach out to our families. We have to reach out to their families. We have to figure this out better. I don't have answers. I do know that, especially the families, I'm honored to have become close friends with many parents of LGBTQ kids, over the young men and women, over adults, over the past 2 years since, I reached out in that way. And many of them feel so alienated. A number of the people that I've spoken to, they're people like us, regular, wonderful people. They're dealing with this issue as best they can. They weren't looking for it. It's there. They love their children. They want to try to make it all work. And many of them, a number of them, I'd say more than 5, moved out of their own communities because they felt so alienated. We have to do more. My takeaway in a positive way, like I said, treasure our families, treasure life, treasure our relationship with God, to be beyond going to the shul and that beautiful trapping that we all miss. It's the core relationship with God. And think about the other. Think about the other, the people who are alone in plain view, that without compromising 1 ounce, 1 bit of our commitment to halacha, commitment to God, commitment to our Torah. There's much that we could do to make people feel not feel alone. And those of us, all of us, having tasted fear and anxiety and loneliness and being distanced from the people that we love, I think that would be the most meaningful takeaway that we could have from this experience, I believe, is to hold this, remember this thought, remember what it felt like, and use it to reach out and make our world a more welcoming place. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Horowitz. Dr. Rosmarin, I'm going to unmute you as well, because there's a question that's come in that I think is relevant for both of you. So you're both unmuted now. The questions come in, most of what Dr. Rosmarin and Rabbi Horowitz has spoken about is relevant to the entire community, but what would you advise people who actually have had COVID, who've really suffered but got out the other side, the emotional issues associated with having suffered through this virus that is a pandemic here?
Doctor?
I was just going to say, Rabbi.
That sounds like a doctor thing.
I was going to say, it sounds like a rabbi thing. I guess I'll share this, which is, it's so hard to generalize. This issue it's affecting people in so many different ways. It's so hard to predict even whether COVID will affect people. I saw something today that vitamin D might be impacted. Who would have thought vitamin D? People with pre-existing conditions, people without conditions, people at all different ages. The medical complications are, it's very, if it were so easy to predict who would be affected by it, we wouldn't have as serious of a quarantine around it. I mean, part of the issue is that it's somewhat idiosyncratic. I would say the mental health implications for people facing it are no different. It completely depends whether they're alone, whether they're with somebody, whether they are affected financially by it. Do they have subsequent medical complications as a result? I've seen people who were on the brink of death and now they're walking around and they're fine. Other people have to go through months, weeks, if not months of physiotherapy in order to rebuild muscles, in order to regain their strength, in order to nurse them back from, literally from the brink of death. So it so depends. And I think that might be the message, that we have to meet people where they're at. This has to be an individually tailored approach, having conversations with people. What do you need? We can't make assumptions, and we have to come to people around us that you don't just assume that this is what I need because that's what seems to be on the outside. This is who I am. This is what I need. And sort of expressing that, that interdependence that I was speaking about beforehand, I think that's kind of the goal.
And I think from a theological perspective, from a Torah perspective, I think the people who do survive, thankfully, I'm a big believer in making small incremental changes. I don't think people who survive should look at it and totally change their lives in every single way. That's that does not, and all of us, in fact, relatives of theirs, and all of us, incremental change, the quick change. My Rebbe used to say that Yaakov's dream with the ladder. One of the things about a ladder is you can't run up a ladder, right? There's the small steps. So on a spiritual level, whatever commitments we want to make to become better people, I think the smaller they are, not smaller, but incrementally, I think it has much more chance of being meaningful and staying.
Thank you so much. A couple of other questions have come in. This one also may be for both of you. Do you believe that people with pre-existing depression or anxiety are doing better or worse in the current climate than others? On one hand, it's an exacerbated situation that may make symptoms worse. On the other hand, they're kind of used to it, might be able to navigate the landscape better than those unfamiliar with it.
Doctor, am I going first?
I think, what was that?
Go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah, I think as a clinician, I'll probably try to handle that one. we are finding, I wrote an article about this actually for Prevention Magazine, and I can actually send it over to Dina, who can get it out to the crew here, people participating. What we found in our office at the Center for Anxiety is that many of our patients are actually doing really well. When in the first days of this crisis, I'm like, oh no, this is going to be a total deluge. This is going to be impossible. We're not going to be able to handle this. We have over 300 patients. We have to shift over to telehealth. Many of them are going to be freaking out. Like, what are we going to do? And to my surprise, many of our current patients are actually doing extremely well for, I think, a couple of reasons. One, if they have social anxiety, they don't have to go out. So that makes things easier. Another one, though, is that I think they feel, many people who have pre-existing conditions finally feel understood. Here you have, movie stars who are standing up and saying, I don't know what hit me, like I'm having such a struggle. And finally, I think it's okay. It's really okay for people to say, I'm struggling. And I think that that's given a lot of people with pre-existing mental health concerns that permission to, and that sense of camaraderie with other people. But maybe the biggest reason, and this is what I put in my article in Prevention, is that people who have pre-existing conditions, if they've received treatment, they know the importance of tolerating uncertainty. They know the importance of, you can't manage your emotions all the time, and that's okay. We have to be in a place where we're not always in control of how we feel, of what our situation is, and learning to sort of deal with life as it comes, to accept it. And if people have spent hours in therapy working on that and coming to a place of it, they're actually better positioned now than people who have never had it before, and now all of a sudden are thrust into it. And I think that might be what we're seeing. A lot of people calling us up, our office, in fact, have never had an issue before. A couple issues, though. One, some people who do have pre-existing mental health conditions are not faring well, and I do not want to assume that if somebody has a pre-existing concern that it's going to be a cakewalk. This could be adding fuel to fire. So that's one. And another thing is I haven't seen macro level data on this, and we won't for some time. So it could be that this is just my experience and only what I'm seeing, and granted it's with hundreds of patients, but it's not with tens of thousands. And it could be that I am missing something. So I do want to wait and sort of see what the macro level data says. But based on my limited vantage point right now, that's what I'm seeing.
Doctor, I thank you for sharing that, because, that's not exact. I'm seeing the exact opposite, but quite to the contrary, it might be that those folks aren't calling. So I do appreciate it. I mentioned earlier that the ones who aren't doing well are doing worse now. So that's only for my limited window. So thank you, Doctor, for sharing that. I appreciate it.
That's right. It's hard to know.
Okay, well, next, a couple more questions, then we'll wrap this up. What is the best way to help a family member with PTSD who tends to rage over the minutest of things? Frequency and severity of rage has significantly increased during this crisis.
Come on, that's a doctor question.
Validate. This must be really hard for you. You can come to me. I'm here for you. If you're struggling, please come to me before it boils over. Usually people with PTSD, they have, the progression is a physiological reactivity, like they feel a little bit jazzed. Then we have a cascade of negative thought. And finally, we have those behavioral, like lashing out or substance abuse, or, that's sort of once the lava starts to come up, out of the mouth of a volcano. What we want is to, because the question is from a family member, not from a clinician. I think family members are even better poised to help in some ways, people with PTSD than us, than me as a clinician, which is when you feel yourself getting intense, come to me. I'll give you a hug. I'll hang out with you. We'll go for a walk. I'm here for you and I love you. And not in order to pacify, not out of a place of resentment, but out of a place of loving the person in your family. I think that message is probably the way to go.
And I'd also like to share, as far as halacha goes, in terms of as it relates to Shabbat and Chagim and overall observance of halacha, of Jewish law, Rav Hershel Schachter Shlita has written and distributed a enormous amount of literature and tshuvot, written, explaining leniencies for people who are struggling, especially now. Where David Kohn-Shlita posted a video. And I actually, if anyone's interested, you can go to my YouTube channel. It's Yakov Horowitz. I specifically, what the doctor just said now, I posted a video before Yantif, before Pesach. It's called "How Bad Is Too Bad," and meaning that people should exactly. I gave an analogy of taking the temperature. When you would call Hatzalah or an ambulance, you don't call when you have 105. You call when you're starting to get beyond 101 or so. So I encourage people there, and I made at least a half a dozen videos on this subject, encouraging people who may not have had this question before or should have been asking the question to reach out to Rabbanim. If anybody's interested, you can go to my page. It's ryh@thebrightbeginnings.com. That's my email address. I actually have a fantastic rabbi who's a rabbi of a shul and is also an expert in anxiety disorder. He's available full-time. I introduce him to people who email me. So if anybody's interested, if you have a relative who's struggling, or if you were watching this and you yourself are struggling and would like to discuss the halachic, the Jewish law implications of this, I'll be delighted to set you up with somebody who can address your questions, both as a rabbi and with the clinical end. It's ryh@thebrightbeginnings, plural. ryh@thebrightbeginnings.com. I'm also on social media, Yakov Horowitz on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and LinkedIn. So you can get in touch with me that way too.
Thank you. And just if both Dr. Rosmarin and Rabbi Horowitz could share all that contact information with us, we will then post it to the websites of the two organizations.
Absolutely,
so that people can access them, and that'll be up along with the recording of this in the next couple of days. Last question before we let people go to their Mother's Day virtual brunches. This situation, this relates back, I think, Dr. Rosmarin, and some of the things you were talking about around radical acceptance and embracing. This situation, the extended isolation and the unknowns that go with it, and the climate of fear that it's created, make the situation, as states start to open up, fraught with anxiety for people, both with people with risk factors and those without. How do we help people, particularly those with risks, feel better about getting back to normal?
That's definitely a rabbi question.
You go first. I'll do the rabbi thing.
It does come down to accepting uncertainty. Like I mentioned beforehand, if you know specific people who have risk factors and they're really struggling, we need to be there for them and provide them with that support and give them permission to struggle. I guess I'll just say this, because we've talked around this point but haven't really nailed it. One of the number one reasons why people don't seek help is because they don't have permission to struggle. Only when you don't judge someone, Rabbi, your anecdote before about inviting someone over to your house, like, I can't imagine that I would be here. That says it all, because when someone feels judged, when they feel ostracized, when they feel that there's something's wrong with them, if they're struggling with something, they're never going to seek help. So I think that, validating, like I mentioned beforehand, that's your biggest tool. But there probably are rabbinic approaches, which I think would handle this question a lot better.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. I just want to share with everyone, it might be helpful if you go to my YouTube channel, just look, it's posted in sequential order. Everything that's been on the last 6 weeks has been about this. I specifically did a talk called Explaining the Inexplicable, to help parents deal with these theological questions, which Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, had these questions and posed them directly to God, and God said, I can't give you these answers while you're in this world. So, this is nothing new. And exactly what the doctor said, it's about validating the experiences that they're feeling on an emotional level and on a theological level. Again, it's about an hour long. It's called Explaining the Inexplicable. And, just to close, I mentioned a story there about the Berditchev Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev, the Hasidic master who was known as the defense attorney of the Jewish people. And someone came into his shul. Someone came into his shul one day when he was there. He went over to the Aron Kodesh, to the Ark. he opened up in front of everybody while everybody was praying, and he started yelling at God in the first person. And the backstory was that he had a cow that had died the night before. He was a poor man. That's all he owned. And he was yelling at God like he would yell in the first person. What's he doing, God? You have to take my cow. You can't pick on some of the rich guys. And the people wanted to carry him out of shul because he was blasphemous. And the Rebbe said, I envy his relationship with God. He talks to God like he would talk to a friend of his. So, that's exactly what the doctor was saying in terms of validation. It's validating that it's okay to ask, why are good people dying? And why is this happening? And what did we do wrong? And how could God do this to people? And these are fair questions. I always say that we're more worried about the ones who don't ask the questions. And I think a takeaway message to parents is to encourage your children to ask you whatever's on their minds, and tell them, even if it's a faith-based question, and even if you're questioning God, it's okay, talk about it. I'm more worried about the ones who don't ask. If you're asking, that means that you have a relationship with God that you're troubled with. And I think it's exactly what the doctor was saying about validation.
Great. Well, with that, I really want to thank both of you for what has been an absolutely incredible hour plus. And I can't tell you how much we all appreciate your time and your insights. I'm just putting up the websites again for the two organizations that have sponsored this webinar this morning. Again, we're hoping to have a recording up in the next few days on both websites, along with contact information and references to the articles that Dr. Rosmarin mentioned as well on the websites. Please, in addition to Dr. Rosmarin and Rabbi Horowitz, anybody who needs any help in this time, please feel free to reach out to either organization. We will do our best to help you. I want to apologize again to Dr. Rosmarin about the slides. I promise we did try to test this, but nonetheless,
I can attest to that. I can even attest to that. So,
Doctor, you modeled resiliency.
It happens.
Exactly. we worked on our radical acceptance together. Again, to the extent that folks have ideas about other things our organizations can be doing for the community during these uncertain times, I encourage you to reach out and let us